In this lesson, I'm having students compare the difference between product property of exponents to simplify exponential expressions compared to the power property of products to simplify exponential expressions. And I really want students to get a strong foundation of these two properties based off the meaning of the exponents and using expansion so that they can see why the shortcut works, not just memorizing the shortcut, so that later on in the lesson when we have more complicated exponential expressions, they'll be able to distinguish between which properties they'll be able to use on different expressions. And so I start off the warm-up with what is the difference between simplifying and solving. Students usually say get it into the lowest terms that you can, or the simplest terms that you can, as low numbers as you can, or the variables simplified together. Solving, they try to find the answer or the result is how, or the solution is how they relate the verb solving. And so then we go to evaluate 2 to the third power. Well, what does a 2 to the third power mean? And so we first go through and look at the expansion of each one. And so we talk about that it actually just means the repeated multiplication of that same expression. So 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. And then x to the 5th power. And then x squared multiplied 3 times is repeated multiplication, but x squared also means x times x. So basically you have 6 x's being multiplied, so it's x to the 6th. And then we have 1x and then 3 more x's being multiplied, so it's x to the 4th. That simplifies. And then we have -2. This is the more complicated one for students when they did the warm-up, because we talk about, well, if -2 is already in parentheses, you leave it in parentheses, and then you take that to the being multiplied times itself 3 times, because there's an understood 1 for the exponent right there on the -2. And so it's -2 to the first power times itself 3 times. So if we multiply and expand that out to show the meaning of the repeated multiplication of what exponents mean, -2 times itself 3 times is going to be a -8. And then we talk about the difference between an even amount of negatives being multiplied makes a positive, and an odd amount of negatives being multiplied makes a negative. And then x to the 4th, if I expand that out, x to the 4th times x to the 4th times x to the 4th, and then we write out the 4 x's, and I show that expansion on the board, it ends up being 12 x's expanded out, so x to the 12th. And then we go back and talk about, well, how do you get, so 2 to the 3rd is just 2 being multiplied times itself 3 times, which was 8. X to the 5th, those are just showing the expansion, but when you look at, compare the difference between 4 and 5, what's the difference between that? Is there a shortcut that you could use between 4 and 5? X squared to the power of 3 was how many x's? It was 6 x's. And usually students will recognize or have previously seen that you can multiply the exponents to create x to the 6th. And I talk about, well, can you see the shortcut rule that we could have used on number 5 instead of expanding it? Those are 2 products being multiplied, x to the 1st. Again, you don't see that exponent times x to the 3rd, and that is x to the 4th. Well, you don't multiply those, you add those exponents, and we'll look more at that into the guided practice.